Welcome to the Workplace Ninja Summit 2022 podcast, a live recording directly from Lucerne with interesting topics.
Good morning, and we are back on day 3 with the second interview, and I have Richard on the table. My name is Frans Oudendorp, and Richard, maybe first do a little introduction of yourself.
Sure. My name is Richard Hicks. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Richard M. Hicks Consulting, based out of Southern California in the United States. And this is my first time attending your conference, but I just learned like yesterday that this is the first time you've had the conference. So we're all first-time attenders, I guess.
Yeah, I guess in the past, when we should start the conference, then the pandemic came and everything went virtual. So, virtual. To be here in person, what does that mean for you?
Being in person is fantastic. It's always better to meet folks face to face and converse directly. There's, virtual conferences and virtual meetings, they have their place, right? I mean, they were a necessity because we couldn't do that. But now, getting back to being in person, it's tremendously valuable. And I think most people would agree. And again, that's why the attendance for this conference has been so fantastic.
Yeah, and to be here, see each other in the eyes and that sort of things. That's doing the real stuff, and see lots of folks, familiar faces that we see. We see new faces learn a lot, and that's good. Good to do that again. You gave a session on VPN. That is one of the key things that we're publishing on social, and you're doing a lot of stuff with that, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. I did a session on AlwaysOn VPN, managing it specifically with Intune. So, we did that session this morning. It was a great talk and well attended, and the feedback's been positive. So, yeah.
If we look in. Nowadays, everyone is moving into modern workplace and so on. And I had a talk yesterday with Per Lassen and Nina about Endpoint Manager. And during COVID, everyone, there is a lot of companies are moving into modern, but on-premises is still there. And do we need AlwaysOn VPN?
So the answer is yes, certainly in the short term, and probably the long term as well. At the end of the day, you're right. I mean, we have organizations that are moving rapidly to the cloud. They're consuming cloud services. They're moving infrastructure to the cloud. But not every application or workload lends itself well to using a public interface, like a web interface or something like that. Obviously, we can get most of our applications from the cloud, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange Online, those types of things. We can store data in the cloud. We have interfaces through that for OneDrive for Business and SharePoint. But at the end of the day, those organizations that still rely on things like classic Active Directory and group policy for management, they need persistent connectivity for their domain joined devices, wherever they are, right? And so today's highly mobile workforce, doing that, insisting that people come back to the office so that you can update their machines just is not tenable, right?
Yeah.
And again, if they're still classic domain joined devices or endpoints, then you could be doing kind of a modern co-management with those, but they still need that persistent domain connectivity. At the end of the day, for my customers that are moving aggressively to the cloud and they are moving towards a scenario or a posture where they're using not hybrid Azure AD join, but native Azure AD join, so their endpoints are no longer joined to the domain. They are fully modern, implemented and modern managed, provisioned with Autopilot, managed with Intune. They still find themselves needing access to specific applications, data, and resources on premises that, again, don't have public interfaces or can't easily be exposed through those public interfaces. A lot of times, it's things like, SQL Server databases or, certain file stores that you don't want to make public. At the end of the day, it might simply be for management purposes. I need to get to, infrastructure and services, routers, switches, firewalls, and I need to do so remotely in a secure fashion. And so in those cases, VPN is still a strong use case. So I think VPN will be around for quite some time.
Yeah, and if we look at modern Autopilot, you already mentioned a little bit about that. VPN or AlwaysOn VPN and Intune and Autopilot. Is that a good combination?
Absolutely. So I did a talk specifically on Autopilot and VPN and AlwaysOn VPN. And the use case around Autopilot and VPN is very similar to how it's irrespective of how you were provisioning your endpoints. So if you're provisioning your endpoints using autopilot, and those users using those endpoints do need access to on-premises data that's not, again, publicly exposed, then they're going to need VPN of some sort. So doing always-on VPN is helpful because always-on VPN is obviously just a traditional VPN. The hallmark of that is that it's seamless, transparent, and always on. So it's very user-friendly. The user doesn't have to do anything. It's just on. It's just there. They access resources in the cloud, on-premises, completely transparently and completely seamlessly, and they can just work. They don't have to worry about starting a VPN and connecting and then authenticating, entering their MFA, and then accessing the resource. It's just there. It's a shortcut on their desktop. They click on it. If they're in the building, if they're out of the building, that shortcut works. And so that's kind of the difference there. There's a unique use case for always-on VPN with autopilot, specifically around hybrid Azure AD join. Yep. Now, if you attended my talk, you'll know that I talked a lot about hybrid Azure AD join and probably why you shouldn't use it. But at the end of the day, it's a supported scenario. And if you do have to use it or do choose to use it, then you probably need to deploy the device tunnel to support offline or remote hybrid Azure AD join, because if you're provisioning a domain join system outside of your network, the first logon must talk to you have to talk to a domain controller for the first logon. You have no user profile, you have no cache credentials, and so in that scenario, you have to have this device tunnel. You can layer the user tunnel on top of that as well if you still need additional access, but predominantly you're going to need that machine tunnel to be able to support the first logon in autopilot with offline hybrid Azure AD join.
Yeah, the device needs to talk to a domain controller.
Correct,
to get information and exchange things.
Yep.
The good, the best, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
That was the title of your session regarding always-on VPN and Intune.
Uh-huh.
What was the ugly part of that?
So the ugly part is there's a lot of critical features missing from the Intune management interface for always-on VPN.
Yeah.
So in the early days of always-on VPN, the Intune support was extremely limited. You only had access to OMA URI. You had to create your XML file, and you had to use OMA URI and publish it as a custom profile.
Yeah.
Later, Microsoft added the VPN template, and they have added features and capabilities to that over the years, right? So when it first came out, it was very limited, missing some critical pieces. Later, they added some new features and functionality, but it's still today missing some very important features that really necessitate still having to use XML to get access to all of those capabilities.
And what about the future? Because we already talked about it. The VPN. There are use cases where VPN still need to be exist.
Oh yeah.
If you look at Endpoint Manager, Intune. Are the features are you mentioning? What about the future? Are they developing things that helping you in your day job?
So specifically with regards to Intune, are you talking about?
Yeah, probably.
Or the technology itself?
Yeah, the technology itself.
So the technology itself, yes. So Microsoft. So the technology is pretty mature. VPN is not something new, right? It's been around for ages, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, there's been some fine tuning of improvements, some stability to IPv2 support for TLS 1.3 coming in Windows Server 2022 and Windows 11, which helps for SSTP or Secure Socket Tunneling Protocol. That's going to be a huge win for administrators because it provides better security and better performance out of the box. You don't have to do anything. It's just automatically secure. That's going to be a huge win. As far as the Intune piece goes, again, going back to what I was saying, there's a lot of missing functionality there. That will come eventually. Some of it I'm aware is coming. Some of it we're working to, implore the Intune team to fix or add. So it's a work in progress, but at the end of the day, we are making progress for sure.
Yeah, good to hear. When looking at always-on VPN regarding access to on-prem resources, you can also use AVD or an RDS or whatever.
Oh yeah.
There are differences, but is it one or two, or is it working together?
So definitely complementary, no question. The majority. Or the major use case, I guess the the primary motivating factor for using a VPN is mostly centered around domain joined devices because they need persistent low-level network connectivity, and then any sort of application and data access that might be more network layer, right? So I need access to TCP port 445 to run some sort of API interface or something to that effect, right? It doesn't have an HTTP interface. I can't access it over a web protocol.
Yeah.
And so things like that. And again, a common use case is, router and switch management, a SQL database access, running PowerShell scripts against domain joined systems remotely and things like that. Those types of things aren't easily exposed with web interfaces, or sometimes can't be, or are not available. So in those scenarios, that's kind of a major driver for those types for a VPN technology.
Yeah, I had a talk already yesterday with some other people. Everything is moving into modern and cloud and so on, but on-prem is still there, and I don't think it is moved in the next year.
I don't think on-premises is going away anytime soon. I think the demise of the Active Directory is greatly exaggerated.
Yeah.
And to that point, just a few months ago, Microsoft introduced public preview for import of ADMX files.
Yeah.
And that just tells you that that's not moving as quickly as certainly they would have anticipated, because I'm sure they never, ever imagined having to support ADMX in Intune. They are doing it now.
Yeah, they do.
So,
yeah.
And they only do things if they have to, right? There's has to be a huge business driver for that, and quite clearly, enterprise, corporate enterprises have dictated, we need this functionality. Yeah. We use Active Directory and group policy today. We need an analog for that. We need feature parity in Intune because of the things we do. And for me, I always thought, and again, I always mention at these conferences, I'm not a systems management professional. I'm a networking and security professional, but I work very closely with systems management folks. And so one of the things that I have learned is that, when you're moving to, Azure and Intune, this is a time to reimagine the things that you do, not just simply lift and shift. And so in those scenarios, you don't want to just look at your group policy and say, well, I need to bring my group policies over. You should remanage that. How can I do the things that I do with group policy with Intune? But at the end of the day, I think there was just enough stuff there that Microsoft eventually had to punt and say, we're going to allow you to bring your ADMX files over here and we can support it. So that speaks volumes to how heavily invested corporate America or corporate internationally is invested in classic Active Directory, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
I know it is years ago that when Intune came up and that sort of things, that the first things that I get from customers, can we move our ADMX, our GPOs, can we move that into the product so to do the things that we normally do?
Right, yeah.
And then we asked, they said no, and then a few years later, and it's in the product.
And again, I think the biggest thing there is, the biggest driver for that would be third-party applications.
Yeah.
I work with a software partner vendor of mine where we have a solution that works for on-premises Active Directory. It's for managing AlwaysOn VPN. And it was built as a niche product to meet the requirements of those customers who are still using Active Directory. So the idea was, well, if you're moving to Intune, you don't need this product. But now it opens up a whole new market, because their software, this is a really compelling software solution, is now opened up to an audience where it's like, hey, we can get these features and benefits that were largely just for our on-premises customers before they migrated. But now, even if you've migrated, we can still take advantage of all the advanced features and capabilities in this product and still manage it with group policy. So it's a win-win. So I see it as huge. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah. Besides VPN, AlwaysOn VPN, you had always also a session on certificates, and certificates can be used within VPN and so on. Deploying on-prem certificates. I'm using and I advising customers also about certificates, but nowadays we see some online vendors like Scapman, for example, delivering online certificates. Do I need on-prem certificates, or can I just release a service for that?
So yeah, absolutely. You can leverage cloud services for that, and there's a variety of vendors and providers that support that. I think the most common use case for that is organizations who already have an existing on-premises PKI. So they've already got Active Directory, they already have integrated ADCS, Active Directory Certificate Services, and this is a mature solution for them. They're already managing it, they already have it, and now they're moving to the cloud. Yep. And so now they're in the biggest one of the biggest factors for adoption of these technologies like Intune and certificates is the fact that they're moving to things like Autopilot, and they have the ability to provision this endpoint completely remotely, except for it needs certificates now. Well, certificates are always on premises, right?
Yep.
And so Intune Certificate Connector bridges that gap. It allows you to deploy your enterprise PKI certificates using Intune. And again, if you have an existing PKI, great. If this is a greenfield deployment, then certainly I would investigate solutions like SCEPMAN or many of the other cloud providers, because then you don't have to manage the infrastructure. You just have to consume certificates as a service, and I'm sure they're fantastic.
It's more a complex thing, and it's being more complex because the knowledge of people is going down, because what are we doing with certificates on-prem still?
Yeah.
If you have and you can maintain it, okay.
Yes.
But another way, please, then it's more preferable to use a service for that. So
it ultimately depends on what your use cases and individual requirements are.
Yeah,
there may be some requirements that dictate you must own the certificate services infrastructure. Yeah. You must demonstrate that you have absolute control over the private keys for the root and issuing CAs. And in those scenarios, you can't consume a service because you don't actually have that, right? So you need to have your hardware security modules, your HSMs on premises, and they need to be demonstrably protected, right? So, and there's all sorts of crazy processes that that get involved when you're talking about managing certificates, or specifically private keys on root and issuing CAs. And there's documented processes and procedures, and very complex. You can't do that with a cloud service. You're abdicating that responsibility to them, but in some scenarios you may not be able to support that.
It always depends. That's the answer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you for joining me on the table.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great to have, and enjoy your stay. Probably you have some days off.
I do, yeah. We always extend our trips over here. This is my third time to Switzerland. I have I've done a couple of trainings here, and I've also have some customers here, so it's been fantastic. We're going to hang out for another week plus and go explore the countryside.
Yeah, the country is very beautiful.
Fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for joining us. And if you want to listen and see more, please tune in later on, so where I have other people that I will interview. So